What's going on, guys? Rodent44 back with you again for another scenery tutorial for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Or, you know what, maybe it's a stretch saying this is a scenery tutorial. This is more like a general tutorial. Anyways, today's topic, we're going to be covering and taking a look at PBR materials, and more specifically, how to manually compile a comp texture for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So, what textures do PBR materials consist of? Well, a PBR material normally consists of a color, displacement, normal, and roughness map. This is generally, if you download a texture, the normal setup you're going to get. However, some PBR materials may come with an AO or ambient occlusion map as well. And basically, if you're not familiar, an AO map is shadowing in your model. So if you picture where two surfaces come together, it is the shadow cast by those two surfaces, the distance between those two surfaces. So the closer one object is to another, the harsher that shadow is going to get, even though, it's still going to be kind of a soft shadow in general. But that's basically what an AO map is. It's just shadowing on your model, baked to texture. Now, Microsoft Flight Simulator already does this by default on the fly in the sim. However, generating an AO map and having that included in your comp texture does help to reinforce that and make it stand out more in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So if in general you can create a model with an AO map, it's always good to do so. Now, what does a comp texture consist of? Well, a comp texture normally consists of 3 of those PBR materials. And those materials are loaded into the color channels of a single material. So you have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel in your standard image. Well, the red channel receives the AO map, the green channel receives the roughness map, and the blue channel receives the metallic map. So let's talk about each individual texture a little bit more in depth. We'll start off with the AO texture, or your ambient occlusion texture. This texture is a black and white texture. There's no color data in this, so make sure it is a grayscale texture, where areas of white are full-on direct lighting, are not affected by any shadowing, and areas of darker colors, grays, up all the way to flat black, is obviously your areas of shadowing, or areas where lighting is not going to be hitting as directly. Your green channel, or the roughness map, is also a grayscale texture, or black and white. So areas of white in the texture are more rough, and areas of black in the texture are less rough or more shiny. So if you want to create a metallic texture, obviously you're going to have more of a black channel for your green channel, or a black texture for your green channel. If you need something that's a little bit more rough or not as reflective, you're going to have more white in that channel. Which leads me on down to the metallic texture, which also is a grayscale texture. So I should probably point out, or probably should have pointed out beforehand, that these are all grayscale or black and white textures. For the metallic map, more metal or more shininess is white, and less shininess, more dull, plastic-esque textures are going to be black, or more towards the black spectrum. So if you want something that's plastic, you're going to have a basically black texture, and you're going to keep a little bit of reflectiveness by having a little bit darker of a roughness texture. So all 3 of these materials are combined together and create what's called a comp texture in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now we're going to take a visual run through setting up these textures in both Photoshop and Gimp. So if you use Photoshop, stick around here, we're going to jump right into that. But if you use Gimp, I do have a timestamp down in the description below. Feel free to check that out, skip ahead to that part if you use Gimp. So let's go ahead and run through building a comp texture for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, I should probably precede this tutorial by saying that check your whatever program you're using to create your PBR materials with, whether it's Armor Paint or Substance Painter. because some of these programs will automatically compile a comp texture for you. So I'm not sure about Armor Paint, but I do know for Substance Painter, it will compile the type of comp texture that you need for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So before you mess around with having to compile your own comp texture, I would check with that program first just to see if it can simplify your workflow a little bit more. Also, furthermore, this comp texture, because it applies to both GIMP and Photoshop, I want to cover this here. When you create your material for your comp texture, make sure that it is a 16-bit image. 16-bit. So typically your images are 8-bit. Make sure you set it to 16-bit. And as we do each individual Photoshop and GIMP tutorial here, I'm also going to show you how to do that. So without further ado, let's get into these tutorials, shall we? So to start off in Photoshop, we're going to go up here at the top and we're going to hit New, or Control N, I guess, in Photoshop. And we need to figure out what the resolution of our texture is. So I'm going to hit Properties here, and this is all off screen, so you're not going to be able to see it. Now, this is a tiling PBR material, so this is not a texture sheet like you get off of a model that you have unwrapped. So I'm just using this as an example. Obviously, yours is going to be a little bit different, but it's the same principles. And I have a 1024 by 1024 texture here, so we're going to say 1024. Whoops. 24 by 1024. As I mentioned, set it to a 16-bit material. If it's not 16-bit, you will see some artifacts in the lighting of the material. Hit OK. And for whatever reason, it set it to a grayscale. I might have accidentally had that checked on the settings for some reason, but we want it to be in RGB texture. So red, green, blue channels. Now let's go ahead, and I have right here all of my textures for this material. We're going to open up the metalness map, the roughness map, and this one in particular does not have an AO map. So I'm going to go ahead and, I don't want to copy you. We're going to throw this off screen. Get over there, you. Open them up here at the top. Let's start off with our roughness map. Hit Control A and Control C the copy. Control A, obviously, the select. Control C the copy. Go to our green channel, have that selected, and we're hit Control V to paste into that channel. Up here at the top, we do not have an AO map for this texture, so we want to set this to full white. Now, if you did have an AO map, or if you generated an AO map for your materials, then obviously you're going to paste that into this red channel. But as we don't have that, we're going to set it to white. Then here at the bottom, we have our metalness map. So as this is a metal texture, as we can show by hitting the preview here, this is what the material is going to roughly look like. We can see that it's mostly all reflective with some individual areas of non-reflectiveness inside of it, which is what all these black specks are. So the majority of the texture is white, as we had mentioned before. So back on Photoshop, everything's selected, hit Control C, go back over to our texture, and we're going to paste this one into the blue channel. So in the case of this texture, that's all we need to do. We just place those two maps in here and set our ambient occlusion map to white. To export this texture, we're just going to make sure we have RGB selected, so we're exporting all of the colors. Go up here to the top and we'll say Save As. I'm just going to save this to, let's create a folder on my desktop here. And I'm going to save it as a PNG texture. You can also save it as a TIFF texture if you'd like. But typically I save all these as PNG textures, as the compression is usually a little bit better. So we're just going to name this something, ESD metal. Wow, I'm really typoing things today, aren't I? Metal, rid of that, comp. And then we're going to save this as I usually use the highest compression. Takes a little bit longer on Photoshop to save if you have bigger textures, but yeah. I like saving file space if I can. So we're just waiting on this to export. There we go. Now it's exported. We have the new folder here on my desktop. So we'll go ahead and open that up, and we can see our compiled comp texture. So that's pretty much it. That's all you need to do to compile a comp texture. That was how to do it in Photoshop. Now let's jump over to GIMP and let's take a look at how to do this in GIMP. And now with GIMP loaded up, welcome to the GIMP segment of this tutorial. If you're still watching from the Photoshop segment, just because you like watching things to completion, well, hi. If you are just joining us for the GIMP segment, you're not going to get what I'm about to say, but for the Photoshop users that have watched up to this point, you're going to notice that this is fairly similar. So first and foremost, let's boil all back down to the basics of what we need to do to get this comp texture started in GIMP. So up here at the top, we're going to hit File, New. I'm going to go ahead and drop down the advanced options here. We're going to set this to 1024 because that's what our texture resolution is for this texture. As I mentioned in the Photoshop tutorial, or segment of this tutorial, this material is just a tiled texture. This is not an unwrapped texture. So obviously yours is going to look a little different than mine is, but it's the exact same principles and exact same setup if you need to do this manually. So besides cosmetics and looks, it's the exact same. So I'm just setting some general settings here. Typically your resolutions want to be 72 pixels per inch. For whatever reason, it had defaulted to 300, which is what's used for print, which obviously we're not printing anything, so we only need really 72 or really no more than like 82 or 92 typically for images, but usually the standard 70. Anyways, we're getting off topic. One thing that's very important, the precision, the colors. We need to make sure that is set to 16-bit colors. Typically your images are defaulted at 8-bit, but for a comp texture it needs to be 16-bit. So set it to 16-bit. Alright, so we got 1024 by 1024, so 1K texture sheet, power of 2 image. And then it's RGB at 16, so we'll hit OK. And on GIMP here, we need to have this layers window open. I believe you do Windows... yeah, Windows and then layers is what you would hit. Dockable dialogues, layers. You'll have to forgive me a little bit here because I rarely use GIMP. I pretty much almost entirely work in Photoshop. But I still kind of remember my way around it a little bit. So on that layers panel, we're going to click on the second icon here at the top, and we're going to have our red, green, and blue channels pop up. Now to access each individual channel, we need to make sure that we have the channels deselected. So it's going to be darker channel or darker color if it's selected. So deselect them all. And then we're going to hit the eyeball on the channels we don't want to focus on. So we are just focusing on the red channel right now. Now, it looks like the red channel to me is already painted white. So we're going to, just to be sure, where is our bucket fill? I believe that's it right there. Yeah. So it seems to already be white. So we're going to deselect that, hit the green channel here, and then we're going to go ahead and open up our roughness material. So open with GIMP. And inside of here, we're going to have rectangular select tool selected. I believe I can hit Control A. Yep, Control A to select, and then Control C to copy. And then with that channel selected, we're going to Control V into that green layer, or that green channel. And go ahead and deselect that. We don't need it. We can go ahead and get rid of our roughness guard. And we're going to go ahead and do the same for our metalness map. So open with GIMP. This is all off screen, by the way. That's why you can't see it. Hit Control A, Control C. Go ahead and discard changes on that, and better get over onto our blue channel. Selected, and we'll paste into the blue channel. Now we can go RGB, reselect everything. By the way, I kept the red channel white, which is our ambient occlusion channel. I don't think I mentioned this because there is not an ambient occlusion map for this texture. So, as we talked about before, white means that it's not going to be affected by any shadowing or shading. So that's why we let this pure white. And if we compare this texture to the one in Photoshop, we'll notice that it is exactly the same. So that means we've done this successfully. But first and foremost, we need to export this. So we're going to export this as a PNG to my desktop. New folder. PNG. So we'll say ESD. Metal. Yep. And then typically when you're creating these textures, you're going to put underscore comp at the end of it. So it'd be like underscore albedo, underscore comp, underscore normal, or some form of that, just to identify what each texture is. So we're going to go ahead and export this. And we can do max compression on the PNG to make it as small as possible. It's lossless, so you're not going to have any issues there. All right, we can go ahead and discard changes, get rid of GIMP altogether. We don't need it anymore. And because I accidentally deleted this already, I'm going to restore this file from Photoshop. And let's take a look at side by side. So first one is Photoshop. This is our comp texture exported with Photoshop. Looks kind of like a big piece of bubble gum. And if we go over to GIMP, we will notice that it is exactly the same. So GIMP, Photoshop, GIMP, Photoshop. So that tells us that we didn't screw up. Anyways, guys, that's how you create a comp texture from scratch. Now, let's talk about how you plug this texture in. So if you're using Blender, you have the Blender to MSFS tool. So Blender to MSFS 2, I think it's called right now. There's also an official one being developed, but it's not ready. So you'd be using that for, if you're exporting this with Blender. Now you'll see that you have all your nodes here, and you're exporting with or plugging this texture into the metallic option. So this is true, whatever program you use to set up the materials for your model, this comp texture is going to go into the metallic channel for that. So right here we can see that the metallic is plugged in Blender. And if we go ahead and transition over to Model Converter X, which is another popular program for setting up these models, we can see here in the material settings for a model, we have a metal channel, and we can go ahead and just plug that into the metallic channel. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's how you set up a comp texture and kind of work with PBR materials for a model. Obviously, you're going to do the same. So you're going to plug in your albedo and your normal, if you have those, into these texture slots as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. It's not rocket science. It's pretty easy. And hopefully after watching this tutorial, you find it fairly easy as well. Anyways, guys, this tutorial is getting a little long, so we're going to go ahead and cut it off while we can. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys learned some valuable information from this. As always, if you have any questions for me, leave a comment down below. Also, as I mentioned in most of my tutorial videos, FS Developer is a great site to go over and ask questions on. So if you don't have an FS Developer account, go ahead and go over, create an account there. It's a really helpful community. Not sponsored, by the way. Not sponsored at all. Just being helpful. But yeah, if you guys liked the video, leave a like on it. Share the video with somebody who, may need some help with this as well. And as always, guys, have a great rest of your day. Running at 44. Over and out.